me from the Minister of Finance. Minister of Finance, would you like to table the National Economic Report for Bermuda?
If it pleases you, Mr. Speaker.
Yes,
Mr. Speaker, I have the honor to attach and submit for the information of the Honorable House of Assembly the 2020 National Economic Report. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. There are no petitions. And now we're to the statement by ministers and junior ministers. The only statement this morning is that of the Minister of Finance giving his budget statement. And members, just to reiterate what I indicated just now, we need to make sure all mics are muted at this time so that the audio going out to the MAs, the audio is going out to CITV, the audio going out to Facebook will be clear of any feedback. So please, members, keep all mics muted. Other than that, all the Minister of Finance. If you would like to follow, you can also see him on screen on CITV while you're listening to him here as well. For our public, CITV or Facebook, as well as the areas that we normally broadcast on the radio station. With that said, Minister of Finance, are you ready to present your statement?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I begin delivery of the statement, I'd like to acknowledge this morning the presence of the family of the late Anthony Manders, Mrs. Teresa Manders, F.S. Manders' sons, Jacon Edwards, Jaden Manders, and Jamori Manders, who are here with me today in the press room.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, the International Monetary Fund has described 2020 as a year like no other, and a truer statement has never been made. On the 24th of March, this government passed regulations.
Mr. Mayor, just interrupt for 1 minute. Members, you can follow on SharePoint. The statement will be up on SharePoint so that all members can follow, and you can collect your hard copies afterwards. But it's on SharePoint now for you to follow the minister as he presents. But sorry about that, Minister. Continue.
Mr. Speaker, on March 24th, this government passed regulations so that we could get immediate cash to our working population who have to sacrifice their own ability to earn a living for the greater good. With very little warning, 1 in 3 income-earning adults were unable to work for the good of the many. 1 in 3. Only 10 months ago, our island home was, for the first time in modern history, shut down. No flights, no restaurants, no shops, no schools, no sports, curfews, quarantines, grocery shopping by last name, and for so many of us, no earnings. To all of those individuals and businesses who have lost so much, I say thank you. More importantly, your pain and sacrifice will not be forgotten. You will work in our economy, and our economy will work for you. Mr. Speaker, once the decision was made to shut down our island economy, we had less than 1 week to get money to our people who were sacrificing so much. It is no exaggeration to say that we had to break it to make it. Bureaucratic machinery is not made for quick pivots. However, we achieved our objective to provide timely and much needed help to our people in an unprecedented crisis. We did not execute perfectly, and for this, I make no apology. As Voltaire said, the perfect is the enemy of the good. Approximately 2,000 people received $1.8 million by the end of that week. We learned, we built, we grew, and we ultimately delivered $56 million to over 10,000 workers. This government extended the original 12-week benefit to 18 weeks, and then added a further safety net of supplemental unemployment benefits that will continue until June 2021. Additionally, the government extended benefits to employees of bars, members clubs, and nightclubs when their activities were restricted due to an uptick in COVID-19 cases in November. Mr. Speaker, we know that the public health emergency meant that the steps we took to protect public health had a devastating impact on our economy. Our local and international businesses, our hospitality and tourism sector, our schools, and our people's lives and livelihoods in ways we could not have imagined 12 months. I'm enormously proud of our community, which has, with humanity, all of the public health measures, challenging as the time has been, and confusion, nonetheless, and for our the Chamber of Commerce, the business community, and others have faced. Sometimes from scratch, while ensuring we have been looking forward strategically. We worked together. Mr. Speaker, we must continue developing the new skills to not only bring our economy back, Mr. Speaker, seeking to rebuild our economy to good enough. We, the intellectual capital, resilient island community, Mr. Speaker, the estimates of revenue and expenditure for fiscal year 2021-22 are designed to support Bermuda's economic recovery. Our shared success as a community in dealing with the pandemic uniquely positions the island for a renewal that can build a strengthened foundation for existing businesses and launch the innovation and growth that will be the next wave of economic activity. We stand on the cusp of a clear path to recovery, and the government will provide the leadership demanded in these times to set the right course for the country. For all of you who invest in our economy will work for you. Mr. Speaker, I've already noted that the IMF described 2020 as a year like no other. The pandemic has had a severe and worldwide impact on health and global economic activity. The IMF expects the world economy to contract by approximately 4.5% over 2020, an outcome worse than after the global financial crisis and unprecedented in modern peacetime. All countries have had to implement the same tools as best they can to protect the health of their populations. The economic impact, like the virus, has not respected national boundaries. Extensive lockdowns and social distancing measures have caused large contractions in unemployment in sectors such as hospitality, entertainment, travel and tourism. And economic uncertainty has impacted consumer sentiment, with overall spending lower and focus on essential purchases, while rising cases and workplace closures have reduced labor productivity and disrupted supply chains. Given the severity of the economic dislocation caused by the pandemic, governments around the world have unleashed a massive fiscal response. Interventions are estimated to total upwards of approximately $14 trillion, approximately 14% of global GDP, well above levels seen in peacetime economic crises. The bulk of the support has been targeted at healthcare systems and vulnerable households and businesses through a mix of additional spending or foregone revenue, including temporary tax cuts, financing support, for example, loans and guarantees, and public sector equity injections. The fiscal response has largely been funded by increased government borrowing. Globally, fiscal deficits have reached approximately 12% of GDP for 2020, up from 3.8% in 2019. And government debt has risen to 98% of GDP, up from 83.5% in 2019. For 2021, the IMF currently forecasts a rebound in global economic growth of approximately 5.5% as economies bounce back from the ravages of 2020. It acknowledges that this forecast is subject to considerable uncertainty linked to the pace and efficacy of vaccine rollout worldwide. With a view to debt affordability, it is expecting countries to reduce deficits from their current levels and to concentrate resources to fund policy actions that will stimulate economic recovery and employment. The IMF calls for a particular focus on policies that raise potential output, for example, infrastructure investments, ensure participatory growth for all, and accelerate the transition to lower carbon dependence. The IMF forecasts for GDP and the evolution of government debt are shown in the charts below. As the world economy recovers, lenders and international institutional investors will increasingly compare Bermuda to countries that have a similar sovereign credit. Past year, our peers have followed a comparable to fund fiscal stimulus. Will be approximately in 2019 and versus 100. As daunting as including a pandemic as a once improve access, enact fiscal reform, and invest in key infrastructure resilience and equipped economy. Societies rebound. Past pandemics came the Renaissance. Changing those economy like that. We have limited levers to be both realistic and creative, disciplined, agile, and adept. Global challenges to our international business. For us to face these challenges over decades and honed during the crisis of the last several months. Mr. Speaker, the most pressing threat to Bermuda's international business sector, and therefore Bermuda's economy, remains the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development's focus on base erosion and profit shifting, and the European Union's list of non-cooperative tax jurisdictions. Brexit, too, is creating challenges and uncertainty, particularly in our reinsurance industry, where there is a new competitive landscape emerging for global reinsurance business, a market we must protect. Mr. Speaker, approximately 6,000 jobs left our shores following the global financial crisis of 2009. Bermuda has since been growing at a modest 0.8% and diversifying its economy, but not with sufficient pace or time to fully recover before the pandemic. With the onset of the pandemic, Bermuda's economy suffered a huge shock which increased local unemployment. The government responded by creating, for the first time in its history, an emergency unemployment benefit to make sure that people who had lost income due to public health measures could still function and survive. The impact on our hospitality, restaurant, and retail sectors may be easy to quantify in economic terms, but impossible to measure in its human cost. New startups using technology to enable restaurant kitchens and retail to continue to deliver food and goods are the perfect example of innovation and community working together. Our community must continue to do all it can to support these sectors. There's nothing more essential to our economy than buying local. The hospitality industry received a shock like no other. Despite the devastating impact of the pandemic to their bottom lines, some of our hospitality partners turned their kitchens to producing food out and others in need. They also understanding the difficult operation really beneficial. Found that their operating revenue had been so. Mr. Speaker, burden of poor planning by one of the ensuring that our Mr. Speaker, government with cost. And well-advised plan protecting the public to the need to stimulate the economy. To take note of some additional average of 8.1%, a declined fuel in the tourism sector. Proportions in the calendar year % respectively. In the first 3 quarters of the calendar from 88.9 construction work put in place to 105. In particular, the insurance sector, the international business sector, 199 jobs in the economy, reflecting a growth here or an increase of 100 new increase. The total and 7%. The foreign exchange earnings of the 16.7 million to 0.1. The help phased and adaptive approach, border closures and curfew, to address the economic from scratch, a 12-week unemployment benefit program to assist individuals who lost their jobs and those whose income earnings were impacted significantly due to restrictions imposed as a result of the pandemic. This program was extended by an additional 6 weeks and paid over 10,000 people, payments approximating $56.8 million. We provided payroll tax relief to the restaurant and bar sector, taxi drivers, and the hotel sector, in addition to extending the deadline for all relevant entities for filing payroll and corporate services tax while waiving penalties and late fees. We provided $12 million of additional funding for the Bermuda Economic Development Corporation to provide support for small and medium-sized enterprises. And we introduced the Work from Bermuda certificate to allow individuals to come to Bermuda to work or study remotely from the island. Mr. Speaker, in May of 2020, we formed an Economic Advisory Committee who gave their time to provide insight and expert advice aimed at protecting and growing jobs and stimulating economic activity during and after the pandemic. Since its formation, the committee has played an important role in providing the government with their expertise, knowledge, and advice to support our economic recovery. Work to address our economic future is ongoing, but there are serious challenges. Today, we have significant financial commitments, including approximately $3 billion in net public debt, financial guarantees for the new airport and the acute care wing, and the block grant which covers health services. There are also significant actuarial gaps, funding gaps in the public sector superannuation fund, the government employees health insurance fund, and Bermuda's contributory pension fund. As I will outline shortly, increased spending resulting from the pandemic and funding economic recovery is driving further near-term deficits and increased pressure on public finances. Mr. Speaker, we are trending in the right direction, although at a slow pace. We were trending in the right direction, although at a slow pace, and the pandemic has forced us to urgently recalibrate. We must act now. Otherwise, as so powerfully put by the poet laureate Amanda Gorman on the steps of the U.S. Capitol just a month ago, we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Mr. Speaker, in addition to the financial fragility I've set out, Bermuda faces some broader risks over the coming years. The most imminent threat in the next 12 to 24 months include economic fragility, which is consistent with many other countries worldwide. Our recovery will be negatively impacted if global growth rates do not recover and if countries find themselves in a continuing round of aggressive pandemic outbreak responses. The same is to be said regarding tourism, which is inextricably linked to the performance of other countries in the public health sphere and economically. Geopolitical risk, in the name of achieving a level playing field between sectors in Bermuda and elsewhere, other countries, standard-setting bodies, and/or trading blocs have insisted on commitments that could create a competitive disadvantage to Bermuda's businesses. Nonetheless, our key trading partners, together with relevant international organizations, have demonstrated their willingness to engage on these matters. In this regard, we continue to actively engage with the UK government, the OECD, the Financial Action Task Force, and the European Union, together with other countries, to make the case in support of Bermuda's commitments as a responsible global citizen. The work of the future: more people may need to transition to a new job in the post-COVID-19 environment as companies review strategies to accelerate automation, increase their technology use, and reduce their physical footprint. This government has passed legislation to attract more businesses and workers to the island, but we must also remain cognizant of the ability of companies to quickly move resources anywhere in the world, as we have witnessed the widespread adoption of video conferencing technologies when normal business travel was interrupted. And climate risk. The existential threat of climate change wrought by global warming is having an impact on countries around the world, and Bermuda is no exception. Because of our isolation, Bermuda cannot afford to ignore the threats to our delicate ecosystem. As a result, we continue to enforce a robust planning and environmental protection framework. In addition, we have formed a partnership with the Waite Foundation and the Bermuda Institute of Ocean Sciences, named the Bermuda Ocean Prosperity Program, to introduce a sustainable, vibrant blue economy while protecting 20% of our exclusive economic zone. We are also working with the UK government to highlight Bermuda's strategies for progressing its measures to mitigate and address the impact of climate change pursuant to the 2020 Joint Ministerial Conference. Mr. Speaker, in my last budget statement, I provided an update on the government's actions in response to demands made on guarantees by the lenders of the Caroline Bay development. At that time, the government had completed purchases of the loans to satisfy its obligations. Additionally, we had purchased claims from the main contractor, DCK Bermuda Limited, in order to facilitate payments to many Bermudian subcontractors who had remained unpaid for an extended period of time, in many cases for more than a year. Mr. Speaker, the government was supportive of the developers continuing to seek financing to repay the government and restart the project. However, it became crystal clear that it was not feasible without the people of Bermuda bearing substantial increased financial risk, which I was not prepared to accept. Furthermore, after such a massive financial outlay of public funds, it was imperative that we both ascertain what happened with the financial management of the project. JPLs have ensured that emergency remediation several local contractors. Necessary work to prepare. The government expects this. A decision will be made. Impact of the government guarantee $100 million of public funds. Not only is there an ongoing interest capacity to fund productive. However, the government committed to using all people of Bermuda. Situation demands COVID-19 pandemic comes in. We can. Bermuda can not only recover, is an fiscal responsibility, economic equity. And November's throne speech insights taken from deliver an economy that will work and has been a hope across the various ministries as part of the plan's development. The EAC the process and input has also been sought. During this process by a set of guardrails and global creditors. The enables this government to stay within these guardrails with the highest expected economic relative cost. And systemic issues, pillars of our economy, matters related to reform already underway. It's principles which echo will further demonstrate both these principles as a priority. It can jeopardize our ability monitoring progress and mitigation. 2. Reduce living for all Bermudians. In economic policies across all segments of our society. 4. Financial viability. To those that show. 5. Fiscal prudence. Finances, mindful. The time is now. Priority initiatives to quickly execute this plan mindful firstly, the Bermuda has fully recovered from the pandemic. Total government debt. We developed a long list of initiatives in making tough and resources in growth and employment. Almost 80 policy proposals cut across where the goal is to diversify financial markets. We will consumers include the BEDC demonstrates strong business plan economy. Infrastructure and enhancing existing for our economy. Facility and investing in the necessary. 4. Expanding economic activity. Every retail business and school wants means more business, leading to more competition and social development initiatives. It is national job strategy, reestablishing national unemployment, implementing minimum wage legislation and a living wage framework to future employment. be paid at least universal health care in Bermuda. Through legislation and regulation, businesses and startups allow Bermuda to benefit from development zone to innovate on the island. And the economic further work will be undertaken over the area in a way that also a business to establish. Mr. Speaker, then no plan at all. Day-to-day operations of the government, knowledge so that we can economy back on a path to ensure that our reputation, Mr. Speaker, Tax Reform Commission, and be integrated in. Speaker, we still have some consultation society who must also. It is of our matter has weathered the storm of global these same and when we and conferences will again reputation as a safe place. This may expanded event capabilities of a branded Grand Atlantic in construction. Myself pleased to advise to support funding necessary subject of an open with a view scenery of delivering services to the people of Bermuda. Many of the men and services and center public health emergency process and Bermuda would not. Notably, in less did not exist to meet the challenge. unexpectedly and tragically lost. We have worked through. We have lost a colleague, government, and who will be missed by hardworking and trusted advisors. Navigate. We continue to keep his wife Teresa and his with such a Mr. Speaker, before budget, it is important for the current pandemic. Mr. $60.6 million. This is $161.6 million in the original estimate. Pandemic on just the impacts being lower payroll tax and levies. However, the original revision. Mr. Speaker, of the government are 5.9%. This was accomplished on the funding of vacant reductions in discretionary spending and uniforms, etc. Result of negotiations, contributions, who participated in the cost-saving initiatives. Conclusion of each individual. However, $1 billion in unbudgeted COVID benefit, 14% entering for the BEDC and funding the Bermuda airport for 2020-2021, $6 million or 7. Budgeted following the onset of the COVID-19 potential and other certain ingredients, and to improve our capital expenditure. $9 million lower than the original budget. Ministry of Finance finance a loan agreement for expensive government debt. Mr. Speaker, in August of 2020, the government accessed international capital markets to execute on this strategy and also to fund the unbudgeted and ongoing COVID-19 expenses and reforecasted budget deficits. Due to Bermuda's credit profile, the offering was in high demand by global institutional investors. Not only did we achieve record low spreads to treasuries, but demand was such to allow Bermuda to upsize the issuance to refinance more debt than initially planned at much lower interest rates. Additionally, we issued Bermuda's first ever 30-year public bond. Overall, the government achieved a 58 basis points reduction in average interest rates and an 8.4-year extension of Bermuda's debt maturity profile. Mr. Speaker, this is validation of the strength of our international reputation and this government's stewardship of the country and its finances in the most perilous times in a generation. However, while we reduced the government's average borrowing costs, total borrowing has increased in order to fund the reforecasted deficits, as I just mentioned, which offset the interest savings on the existing debt. As a result, debt service costs for 2020-2021 are forecast to be $128.8 million, or $7.4 million, or 6.1% above the original estimate. Mr. Speaker, given the projections outlined above, the revised estimate of the overall deficit for 2020-2021 is $245.5 million, or $225.7 million more than the $19.8 million deficit that was originally projected. As of the 31st of March 2021, net debt will stand at $3 billion. The sinking fund balance will be approximately $348.8 million, which will be used to help fund future deficits. Mr. Speaker, I have alluded several times in these remarks to the fiscal challenges that have been caused by the pandemic. This will be a particularly challenging year for us. However, it will be one in which the public will be able to marry our fiscal allocations directly to the promises we have made and hold us accountable for their delivery. The jobs and economic benefits of the Economic Recovery Plan are expected beyond this year, but we must invest now for our future. Our room for maneuver is limited, and we must make difficult choices now to avoid even harder choices in the future. In line with international growth expectations, we expect economic growth to experience a modest bounce back this year. With significant expert input from the EAC and others, our central projection is for conservative economic growth of approximately 3.5%, with a modest rebound across all major domestic and international business sector, but with a conservative view of the recovery of tourism and air travel. Mr. Speaker, a targeted approach has been taken to analyzing the government's current outlays and identifying potential areas where efficiencies could be made. Areas of most substantial efficiencies have been identified, and these align well with broader programs of reform that are underway to identify more efficient and effective delivery models. Mr. Speaker, ministry budgets have been achieved through an arduous and introspective process. Cabinet secretaries, heads of departments, does not reduce any scholarship redundancies or further programs like the child to seniors in rest home of expenditure will reveal national security and of social development. 21-22 national. This level of decrease $2.7 million revised estimates. Revenues are forecast $3 million. It's budgeted to be the current account balance $31.8 million. $97.1 million. $143.5 million. 2021. Budget deficit of 100, which is of a 200. Mr. Speaker, the indicates whether interest on debt and surplus of costs of running or the government has no plan. $4.7 million. Currently sit in the sinking 2022. It is estimated 2021 at will be 3. Revenue-raising measures of the following. The 31st of March, jobs program will be continued. The retail shops a zero rate of customs duty reimbursement of retail shops 26. Further 10 years will remain as is. By the Registrar of Companies to meet changing international within the fee structure of the ROC. Bermuda cannot our revenue generation is the very Speaker, there are no other there is a fragility taxes. Is 900 or 11% lower than the original or 4% higher. The most significant decreases will be in the global economy through the lack of million versus the 20 duty and payroll tax. 0.3 million respectively. debt service of $120 million is estimated at 1.6%. The primary expenditures across all lower spend on COVID-19 related expenses locally and globally. The government to execute improving the health care less fortunate and more to grow and diversify the COVID-19 pandemic. Operating expenditures for 2028 $8 million. Million or 5. Estimate of 9. To properly manage and allocate must be the right mix. Achieving this is no easy task. Therefore, any vacant post service or active recruitment savings to the public purse. The public service managing public expectations, achieving greater value. Prioritization at the start with the government's overall policy. Debt service costs for $7.8 million. Related to the Caroline Bay. The government borrowed and deficits due not had to do so. Debt would be forecast to transactions would have resulted in a $17.6 million. Mr. Speaker, the COVID-19 pandemic to $2.9 billion. Of public health and emergency. In July, I mentioned earlier, the government billion. Due to COVID-19 and the Carolina. Guardrail in our economic recovery plan. Expect that a surplus continue with our pre-pandemic debt. No further increase. Mr. Speaker, remediation and new encourage infrastructure like these. Set at 92.9 in economic recovery. Facility to support a new and community organizations, institute consistent with this upgrades to the Marine and Ports work concerns around worker safety. There is an understanding to dictate our actions down to the and tested our patience by this pandemic. We're being forced to wear a mask. But, Mr. Speaker, as we witness the energy to the world for testing, our unity of purpose followed by our economy. Excuse me, by provide the support and relief required. I am the son of I did not have. I went off to college. I hope that I'm able to get back locally. Mr. Speaker, whom is now a young adult. And full of possibility. We will each enjoy the dignity of work and live a life of my education. And I do not spend more money today we are still in a to the future. Part of that is continuing protecting the economic recovery and be better. Diversity. Innovation. This future economy requires, and most of all, not have courage to execute our economic recovery. An economy. We have welcomed close to 400, and we must welcome more. but also to bring us new. In the midst of a pandemic is and diversifies our community. The new way forward requires of our people and our have confidence that we have the right leadership. Turn adversity into opportunity. Discipline, skill, pandemic. Our future will be to create, seize them, work hard, surviving but thriving. Of this honorable House 2021-20